What would you do if you knew someone was being murdered right in front of you, but your voice meant absolutely nothing? The teacup was halfway to Gerald Whitmore's lips when Clarice Monroe's hand shot across the table and slapped it away. Hot tea exploded across the white marble floor, china shattered into a dozen pieces. Gerald jerked back in his chair, eyes wide with confusion. Victoria Whitmore stood frozen in the doorway, her perfectly painted lips forming a small O of shock. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Clarice? Gerald's voice came out weak and trembling. What on earth? Don't drink it! Clarice's chest heaved up and down. Her dark hand was still extended, shaking. Mr. Whitmore, please, don't drink anything she gives you. Victoria's shock transformed into something cold and dangerous. Her ice-blue eyes locked onto Clarice like a predator sizing up prey. Have you lost your mind? Victoria's voice cut through the kitchen sharp as a blade. Gerald, this woman has clearly gone insane. Mrs. Whitmore, I know what you've been. You're fired. Victoria stepped forward, her silk dress rustling. Get out of this house, right now, before I call the police and have you arrested for assault. Gerald tried to stand, but his legs buckled. Clarice rushed to steady him, but Victoria was faster. She positioned herself between them, her body language screaming possession and protection all at once. Don't you touch him, Victoria hissed. You've done enough damage. Gerald, darling, are you all right? Did she hurt you? I'm fine, Gerald's words trailed off as he slumped back into the chair. His skin looked gray. His hands trembled against the armrests. I'm so tired. Clarice's heart cracked watching him. This man was dying, and she was the only person who knew why. Mr. Whitmore, please listen to me. Out! Victoria's scream echoed off the kitchen walls. Get out of my house or I swear to God I'll have you thrown in jail. If you're watching this for the first time, welcome to Topcore, where we bring you real American stories that matter. Hit that subscribe button because what you're about to hear will shake you to your core. This is a story about courage, justice, and the truth nobody wanted to hear. But how did we get here? How did a black maid in 1963 Charleston, South Carolina, end up slapping a teacup out of a wealthy white man's hand and losing everything? Let's go back 3 months. Clarice Monroe had worked as a domestic servant for 17 years. The last 8 of those years were spent in the Whitmore Mansion on Battery Street, a monument to old Southern money with white columns that gleamed in the sun and rooms bigger than most people's entire homes. At 42 years old, Clarice knew her place in this world. She knew which doors to use, which rooms to clean when the family was out, how to be invisible when they wanted her gone and available when they needed something. She'd learned to read people the way other folks read newspapers, watching their eyes, their hands, the tone of their voice when they thought nobody important was listening. Gerald Whitmore was a good man, as far as wealthy white men went in Charleston. He said please and thank you. He asked about her son Marcus. When Marcus needed help getting into a decent school, the kind of school that found reasons to reject black children every single day, Gerald made a phone call, just one call. And suddenly doors that had been locked tight swung open. Clarice never forgot that kindness. Gerald's wife, Victoria, was a different story altogether. Victoria had married Gerald 5 years ago. She'd been his secretary at the law firm where Gerald's family name opened every door in South Carolina. 20 years younger than her husband, Victoria was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful. Perfect on the surface, cold underneath. She wore her privilege like armor, pearl necklaces, silk gloves, a smile that never quite reached those ice-blue eyes. Clarice had learned to read Victoria, too, and what she read made her skin crawl. The trouble started in early June when Gerald caught what everyone assumed was a summer virus. Nothing serious at first, just fatigue, loss of appetite, some nausea here and there. Probably working too hard, Dr. Hutchinson said after his first house call. Rest and fluids, Gerald. You're not a young man anymore. But Gerald didn't get better. He got worse. By July, he could barely climb the stairs without stopping to catch his breath. His hands shook when he tried to sign documents. His once robust frame started looking fragile, almost hollow. The finest doctors in Charleston examined him. They ran tests, drew blood, checked his heart, his lungs, his liver. Nothing. We can't find anything conclusive, Dr. Hutchinson admitted during his third visit. Perhaps stress. The body does strange things under pressure. These things take time to resolve. But Clarice saw things the doctors didn't see. She saw Victoria's face when the doctor said they couldn't find anything wrong. Not relief, but something else. Calculation. Patience. She saw how Victoria suddenly took an interest in preparing Gerald's meals herself. Victoria, who'd never shown the slightest interest in domestic work, who barely knew where the kitchen was. "I'll make his breakfast tray," Victoria would say, shooing Clarice away. "The poor darling has such particular tastes now. I want to make sure everything is just right." She saw the special honey jar that appeared on Gerald's breakfast tray every single morning. Imported honey, Victoria claimed, from some specialty shop in New York. Gerald had developed a taste for it since falling ill. Clarice noticed other things too. Gerald's bad days, the days when he vomited, when his hands shook so badly he couldn't hold a pen, when his speech slurred like he'd been drinking. Those days always came after meals Victoria prepared personally. Always. Clarice kept these observations to herself. What else could she do? She was the help, the maid, a black woman working in a white household in 1963 Charleston. Her thoughts on medical matters meant less than nothing. But late at night, lying in her small room in the servants' quarters, Clarice couldn't shake the feeling crawling up her spine. Something was profoundly wrong in the Whitmore house. And on a Thursday afternoon in late August, Clarice discovered exactly what that something was. She'd been polishing silver in the dining room when she heard Victoria's voice drifting through the parlor door. The door was cracked open just a few inches. Victoria's voice was lower than usual, almost conspiratorial. Clarice's hand froze mid-polish. "It won't be long now," Victoria said into the telephone. Clarice held her breath. "Another month perhaps, or two. The doctor says his organ function is declining." A pause. Then Victoria laughed, a cold, brittle sound that made Clarice's stomach turn. No one suspects anything. Why would they? I'm the devoted wife, remember?" Clarice's heart hammered against her ribs. Once he's gone, the life insurance alone is worth $500,000, plus the estate, the investments. Victoria's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "We'll finally be free to be together, darling. Just be patient." The silver serving spoon clattered against the marble table. Victoria's voice stopped mid-sentence. Clarice heard the click of heels against hardwood, fast, coming closer. She grabbed the spoon and scrubbed at an imaginary spot, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it again. Victoria appeared in the doorway, the telephone cord stretching behind her. Her eyes swept the room, landing on Clarice with laser focus. "How long have you been here?" Victoria's voice was casual, but her eyes were nothing but. "Just cleaning the silver, ma'am, like every Thursday." "Did you need something from me?" "No, ma'am." Victoria stared at her for what felt like an hour, then turned and walked back to the parlor, closing the door firmly behind her. Clarice heard the lock click. That night, Clarice lay in her small bed staring at the ceiling. Victoria wasn't nursing Gerald back to health. She was waiting for him to die. No, worse than that, she was helping him die. And Clarice was the only person who knew. Clarice didn't sleep that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Victoria's voice. "It won't be long now." That cold laugh. "The life insurance alone is worth $500,000. Gerald Whitmore was being murdered in his own house. Slowly, carefully. And everyone thought he was just sick. By morning, Clarice had made a decision that would either save a life or destroy her own. She was going to prove it. The problem was simple and impossible all at once. Who would believe her? A black maid accusing a wealthy white woman of murder in Charleston, South Carolina? In 1963, Clarice had lived 42 years in the South. She knew exactly how that story ended. It ended with her in a jail cell or worse. It ended with her son Marcus losing his mother. It ended with her name dragged through the mud while Victoria walked away clean. But doing nothing meant watching Gerald die. Gerald, who'd helped Marcus get into school when every other door slammed shut. Gerald, who said please and thank you like she was a human being instead of furniture.
Gerald, who was a good man trapped in a system he'd been born into and never questioned. A good man didn't deserve to be murdered, no matter what color his skin was. So Clarice started watching. Really watching. She kept a small notebook hidden in her apron pocket. In it, she wrote down everything. Times, dates, what Victoria prepared, how Gerald reacted. August 23rd, 7:15 a.m. Victoria makes Gerald's breakfast herself. Oatmeal with honey. Gerald eats. By 9:30 a.m., he's vomiting in the bathroom. August 24th, 12:30 p.m. Victoria brings Gerald lunch on the tray. Tea with honey and lemon. Gerald drinks it. By 3 p.m., his hands shake so badly he can't sign papers. August 25th, 6:45 p.m. Victoria insists on making Gerald's evening tea. Special honey again. Gerald's speech slurs during dinner. Dr. Hutchinson is called. Finds nothing wrong. The pattern was clear as daylight. Every meal Victoria prepared personally, Gerald got worse. The honey was always there. Always. That special imported honey Victoria kept locked in her vanity drawer. Clarice had cleaned Victoria's bedroom 1,000 times. She knew every piece of furniture, every drawer, every hiding spot. She'd seen Victoria lock that vanity drawer and tuck the key in a hat box on the top shelf. For 2 weeks, Clarice documented everything. Her notebook filled with evidence that meant nothing without proof. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, opportunity knocked. "I'm going to garden club," Victoria announced, checking her reflection in the hall mirror. "I'll be back by 4. Make sure the house is spotless, Clarice. We're having guests for dinner tomorrow."
Yes, ma'am.
Clarice watched Victoria's car disappear down the long driveway. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Gerald was upstairs taking his afternoon nap. The house was empty. This was it. Clarice climbed the stairs to Victoria's bedroom. Each step felt like walking toward a cliff edge. If Victoria came back early and caught her, it was over. Fired at minimum. Arrested for theft, maybe. But Gerald was dying. Someone had to do something. Victoria's bedroom was perfectly organized. Everything in its place. The vanity sat against the far wall, its mirror reflecting Clarice's terrified. Clarice pulled over a chair, reached for the hat box on the top shelf. Her hands shook as she lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was the small brass key. The vanity drawer unlocked with a soft click that sounded loud as a gunshot in the quiet room. Inside was the honey jar. Amber liquid that looked innocent enough, sweet, natural. But next to it was something that made Clarice's blood run cold. A small brown bottle with a faded label. Arsenic trioxide, for pest control. Poison. The bottle was half empty. Clarice stood frozen, holding evidence of murder in her trembling hands. This was it. Proof. Real, actual proof that Victoria was poisoning her husband. Arsenic in the honey, day after day, slow enough that doctors wouldn't notice, slow enough to look like natural illness. Clarice's mind raced. Take the bottle, run to the police, show them, make them listen. But even as she thought it, she knew the truth. Her word meant nothing. Black Maid with a stolen bottle accusing her white employer, they'd arrest Clarice before Victoria's name ever came up. Victoria would say Clarice planted it, that Clarice was the one poisoning Gerald, trying to frame an innocent woman. Clarice's hands shook so badly she almost dropped the arsenic bottle. A car door slammed outside. No, 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 no. Victoria wasn't supposed to be back for another hour. Clarice's heart stopped. She shoved the arsenic bottle and honey jar back in the drawer, locked it with fumbling fingers, climbed on the chair to return the key to the hat box. Footsteps on the stairs. Clarice jumped off the chair, pushed it back to its spot, smoothed her apron. Her reflection in the vanity mirror showed pure terror. The bedroom door opened. Victoria stood in the doorway, her eyes moving from Clarice to the vanity to the chair and back again. "What are you doing in my bedroom, Clarice?" Clarice's mouth went dry. "Cleaning, ma'am. You said you wanted the house spotless for tomorrow's guests." "I don't recall asking." It was a desperate plan, probably a useless one, but it was all she had. Clarice was about to learn just how worthless her truth really was in a world that had never wanted to hear it. And Victoria? Victoria was about to show Clarice exactly what happened to people who saw too much. Dr. Bernard Hutchinson arrived at the Whitmore estate every Wednesday at 2 o'clock sharp. He'd been Gerald's physician for 15 years, a respected man in Charleston medical circles. White hair, wire-rimmed glasses, the kind of doctor who still made house calls for families with the right last name. Clarice caught him in the front hall after his examination, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst through her chest. "Dr. Hutchinson, sir." Her voice came out quieter than she'd intended. "Could I speak with you for just a moment?" He was packing his medical bag, not looking at her. "What is it, Clarice? I'm running behind schedule." "It's about Mr. Whitmore's condition, sir. I think I might know—" "Clarice?" He looked up then, but not really at her, through her, past her. "I appreciate your concern, but medical matters are quite beyond your understanding. Mrs. Whitmore has been exceptionally attentive. If anything, she's been too devoted, wearing herself thin with worry. But sir, if you just listen." "I have another appointment." He snapped his bag shut. "Mr. Whitmore is receiving the best care available. You just focus on keeping the house clean. That's what you're here for." The door closed with a decisive click. Clarice stood in the empty hallway, those words echoing in her head. That's what you're here for. Not to think, not to observe, not to speak up when something was wrong. Just to clean. She'd expected this, known it was coming, but hearing it out loud still felt like a slap across the face. Still, she had to try again. Thomas Reed was Gerald's business partner at the law firm, a broad-shouldered man with a booming voice and a handshake that could crush bones. He visited the Whitmore house every Friday to discuss firm business with Gerald. Clarice waited until Thomas was leaving, caught him alone by his car in the driveway. "Mr. Reed, sir, I need to tell you something important." He turned, surprised to be addressed. "What is it, girl?" The word stung, but Clarice pushed forward. "It's about Mr. Whitmore, sir. I believe he's being poisoned." His face changed instantly. Surprise shifted to suspicion, then to something dangerous. "That's a serious accusation. You got any proof?" "There's arsenic in the house, sir. Mrs. Whitmore keeps it locked in her vanity drawer, right next to—" "Arsenic?" Thomas laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Half the houses in Charleston have arsenic somewhere for pest control. Rats. You know what rats are, don't you?" The insult was clear. Clarice felt her face grow hot, but she pressed on. "Sir, she keeps it with a special honey jar, the same honey she puts in Mr. Whitmore's tea every day, and he gets worse after—" "Stop right there." Thomas stepped closer, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper.
Yes, sir. Thomas got in his car and drove away, leaving Clarice standing in the driveway with the summer heat pressing down on her like a physical weight. 2 attempts, 2 doors slammed in her face. Nobody would listen. Nobody would believe her. She was invisible, worthless, nothing. If you're feeling what Clarice is feeling right now, if this story is getting to you, hit that like button and let me know you're here. Because what happens next is going to test everything Clarice thought she knew about right and wrong. The days crawled by. Gerald got worse. His hands shook constantly now. He could barely hold a fork during dinner.
His speech slurred like he'd been drinking, though Clarice knew he hadn't touched alcohol in months. Victoria played the suffering wife to absolute perfection. "Oh, Gerald, darling, let me help you." She'd cut his food into small pieces, dab at his mouth with a napkin, stroke his thinning hair with perfectly manicured fingers. And every morning, she prepared his breakfast personally. Tea with honey and lemon, the special imported honey from New York. Clarice watched it all, feeling like she was trapped in a nightmare, watching a murder happen in slow motion and unable to stop it. But Victoria was watching her, too. Clarice felt those ice blue eyes following her around the house. Victoria started appearing in rooms unexpectedly, standing in doorways, asking questions. "You seem distracted lately, Clarice. Is everything all right? Did you move something in my bedroom? Things aren't where I left them. You've been here a long time. It would be such a shame if we had to let you go." The message was clear. Victoria suspected something. Maybe she'd noticed the vanity drawer had been touched. Maybe she'd seen something in Clarice's face. Maybe she just had the instincts of a predator sensing a threat. Either way, Clarice could feel the walls closing in. At night, lying in her small bed, Clarice pulled out her notebook. Page after page of observations, dates, times, symptoms, all worthless without someone willing to listen. She thought about going to the police directly, walking into the station and demanding they investigate. But she lived in Charleston her whole life. She knew exactly how that would go. A black woman accusing a prominent white family of murder? They'd laugh her out of the building or arrest her for wasting their time. Clarice had never felt so powerless in her entire life. She survived poverty, survived her husband walking out when Marcus was 3, survived 17 years of cleaning other people's homes, raising other people's children, being treated like she was invisible. But this was different. This was watching evil happen, and knowing her truth meant absolutely nothing. On Saturday evening, Clarice was in the kitchen preparing dinner when she heard the crash. The sound of a body hitting the floor. Heavy. Final. Then, Victoria's scream, perfectly pitched for maximum drama. "Gerald! Oh God, Gerald!" Clarice dropped the knife she'd been holding and ran toward the study. What she saw made her stomach drop through the floor. Gerald was on the Persian rug convulsing. His whole body jerked and twisted. Foam flecked his lips. His eyes had rolled back, showing only whites. Victoria kneeled beside him, cradling his head. "Someone call an ambulance! Call 911! Oh God, he's dying!" Clarice ran to the phone, dialed with shaking fingers. "We need an ambulance at the Whitmore estate on Battery Street. Mr. Whitmore has collapsed. Please hurry." She rushed back to the study. Victoria was bent over Gerald, stroking his face, making soft crying sounds. But as Clarice entered the room, she saw something that made her blood turn to ice. For just a split second, maybe less than a second, Victoria's face changed. The mask of grief slipped, and underneath was a smile. Not relief, not hope, pure satisfaction. This was it, the final dose. Victoria had given Gerald enough arsenic to finish the job, and she was going to get away with it. The smile vanished as quickly as it appeared. Victoria looked up at Clarice with tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face. "He's dying," Victoria whispered. "My Gerald is dying." The ambulance arrived 7 minutes later. Paramedics rushed in with equipment and urgent voices. They loaded Gerald onto a stretcher, started an IV, shouted medical terms Clarice didn't understand. Victoria rode in the ambulance, playing the devastated wife, dabbing at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, holding Gerald's hand. Clarice stood in the doorway, watching the red lights disappear into the darkness. If she didn't act now, right now, Gerald Whitmore would die in that hospital, and Victoria would inherit everything. $500,000 in life insurance, the estate, the investments, freedom to be with her lover. Murder rewarded. Clarice turned and walked back into the empty house. She climbed the stairs to Victoria's bedroom. Her hands weren't shaking anymore. Fear had burned away, leaving something harder behind. She pulled the chair over, reached for the hat box, took out the key. The vanity drawer unlocked. Inside were the arsenic bottle and the honey jar, exactly where she'd seen them before. This time, Clarice didn't just look, she took them. Wrapped them carefully in a dish towel from the kitchen, hid them in her room, in the back of her closet, behind her shoes. This was theft. Real, actual theft. If anyone discovered what she'd done, she'd go to prison, no question. A black woman stealing from her white employer? The judge would throw the book at her. But these bottles were evidence. Proof. The only proof that might save Gerald's life. Clarice sat on her narrow bed, holding the wrapped evidence in her lap. She'd crossed the line tonight, committed a crime, put everything on the line. Her job, her freedom, her son's future. All for a truth nobody wanted to hear. Outside, thunder rumbled. Rain began to fall, drumming against the roof. Clarice didn't sleep that night. She sat in the darkness, waiting for the knock on her door, waiting for the police to come arrest her, waiting for someone, anyone, to believe that a black maid had seen what everyone else had missed. The knock came at 6 in the morning. Clarice drifted awake from where she'd been dozing in the chair, still dressed in yesterday's clothes. For a terrible moment, her heart stopped. Police. It had to be police. Victoria had discovered the missing bottles, had called the authorities. Clarice's life was over. She opened the door with trembling hands. A white woman stood there, tall, maybe 50 years old, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, wearing slacks and a blouse instead of a dress. Sharp gray eyes that actually looked at Clarice instead of through her. "You're Clarice Monroe?" the woman asked. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Eleanor Whitmore, Gerald's sister." She glanced down the hallway. "Can I come in?" Clarice stepped aside, her mind racing. She'd heard of Eleanor Whitmore, the family rebel, the one who'd moved to Atlanta and become some kind of lawyer for colored folks. The Whitmores didn't talk about her much. Eleanor stepped into the small servants' quarters, taking in the narrow bed, the single window, the photograph of Marcus on the nightstand. "How is Mr. Whitmore?" Clarice asked. "Critical condition. The doctors still don't know what's wrong with him."
Everything spilled out. The overheard phone conversation, Victoria's suspicious behavior, the pattern of symptoms following meals Victoria prepared, the locked vanity drawer, the arsenic bottle next to the honey jar. Eleanor listened without interrupting, didn't dismiss her, didn't tell her medical matters were beyond her understanding, just listened. "You saw the arsenic yourself?" Eleanor asked when Clarice finished. "Yes, ma'am. In Mrs. Whitmore's vanity, in a bottle marked poison, right next to the special honey she puts in Mr. Whitmore's tea." "When did you see this?" Clarice hesitated. This was the dangerous part. 2 weeks ago, and again last night." "Last night?" Eleanor's eyes sharpened. "After Gerald collapsed." "Yes, ma'am." "Did you just look at the bottles last night, Clarice, or did you do something else?" This was it. The moment Clarice either trusted this woman or lied to protect herself. She thought about Gerald in that hospital bed, dying while doctors ran useless tests. She thought about Victoria's satisfied smile when Gerald convulsed on the floor. She thought about justice and truth, and all the times her voice had meant nothing. Clarice walked to her closet, reached behind her shoes, pulled out the dish towel with the bottles wrapped inside. "I took them," she said quietly. "I know it was wrong. I know it was theft. But it's evidence, Miss Eleanor. Real evidence that Mrs. Whitmore is poisoning your brother." Eleanor's face was unreadable. She pulled a handkerchief from her pocket, not to dab at tears, but to wrap around her hands like makeshift gloves. Smart, Clarice thought. She knows about fingerprints. Eleanor carefully unwrapped the bottles, studied the arsenic label, held the honey jar up to the morning light. "This is arsenic trioxide, all right,"
Eleanor said, "and I'd bet money this honey is contaminated with it." She set the bottles on Clarice's small table. "But Clarice, you understand the position we're in." "Yes, ma'am. I stole from my employer. My word against Mrs. Whitmore's." And Clarice's voice dropped. "I'm black and she's white. In Charleston. In 1963. Exactly." Eleanor sat on the edge of Clarice's bed. "I've been a civil rights attorney for 10 years. I've seen cases with better evidence than this fall apart because of exactly what you just described. The racial dynamics alone." Clarice felt hope crumbling. Even Eleanor, who seemed different, who'd actually listened, even she knew the truth was worthless. "But," Eleanor continued, "that doesn't mean we give up. It means we have to be smarter than them." "Ma'am?" "I have a contact, Dr. Chen at the Medical University of South Carolina. He's a toxicologist. He owes me a favor from a case I worked on last year." Eleanor stood, took the bottles. "If this honey is laced with arsenic, he can prove it. And if Gerald's blood shows arsenic poisoning, we'll have scientific evidence, not just your word against Victoria's." Something that felt dangerously like hope flickered in Clarice's chest. "But," Eleanor warned, "even if the tests come back positive, proving Victoria did it is another story. She could claim she knew nothing about the arsenic, that someone else put it there, that you planted it yourself out of spite." The hope flickered and died. "There's only one way to make this stick," Eleanor said. "We need her confession. On record, undeniable." "How would we get that, ma'am?" Eleanor looked at her for a long moment. "You'd have to confront her directly, while wearing a wire. Get her to admit what she's done." Clarice's blood ran cold. "Mrs. Whitmore would never confess to me. She'd just have me arrested for theft, and she might confess if she thinks you're powerless, if she thinks your word means nothing. I know what I'm asking. It's dangerous. If she discovers the wire, if anything goes wrong, I could die," Clarice finished. "Yes." Clarice thought about Marcus, about the life she'd built despite everything, about the photograph on her nightstand of her son in his graduation cap and gown, smiling at a future full of possibility. If she did this and it went wrong, Marcus would lose his mother. But if she did nothing, Victoria would get away with murder, and the message would be clear. Some lives mattered, and some voices would never be heard. Clarice had been invisible her whole life, silent when powerful people needed her silent, small when the world demanded she be small. "I'll do it," she said.
Eleanor's expression shifted, respect mixed with concern. "I can't promise this won't have consequences for you. Even if everything goes right, your life will change. There will be people who hate you for this. There are already people who hate me for existing, Miss Eleanor. At least this way, maybe one good man lives." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Dr. Chen can have the test results within 24 hours. In the meantime, Victoria thinks those bottles are still in her vanity. She has no reason to suspect you took them. She's already suspicious of me. She knows I've seen too much. Then we need to move fast." Eleanor wrapped the bottles back in the handkerchief. "I'll call you when I have the test results. Then we'll plan exactly how to do this." She turned to leave, then stopped. "Clarice, why are you doing this? Really? Gerald's part of a system that's oppressed you your whole life." Clarice thought about that. He's a good man trapped in a bad system. That doesn't mean he deserves to be murdered. And maybe, she paused, maybe if one black woman's voice is heard and believed, just once, it cracks open a door for the next one. Eleanor smiled, sad but genuine. "You're braver than you know." After Eleanor left, Clarice sat alone in her room as the sun rose over Charleston. She'd set something in motion that couldn't be stopped now. In 24 hours, she'd know if the honey was poisoned, and then she'd have to face Victoria Whitmore with a wire taped to her skin, trying to get a confession from a woman who'd already proven she was willing to kill. Clarice picked up the photograph of Marcus. "I'm sorry, baby.
But your mama's gotta do this. Gotta try. Outside, the Whitmore mansion woke up. Birds sang, traffic hummed on Battery Street. The world went on like nothing was wrong. But everything was about to change. And Clarice Monroe, invisible, powerless, worthless Clarice Monroe, was about to force the world to listen. 23 hours after Eleanor left with the bottles, Clarice's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She went through the motions of her daily routine. Cleaned rooms that were already clean, dusted furniture that had no dust, made beds that nobody had slept in. The Whitmore house felt like a tomb without Gerald in it. Victoria had stayed at the hospital all night, maintaining her performance as the devoted wife. She'd called the house once to tell Clarice to prepare fresh clothes and bring them to the hospital. And Clarice, Victoria's voice had gone cold. I hope you haven't been snooping around where you don't belong. I'd hate to discover something was missing from my bedroom. The threat was crystal clear. Clarice had checked Victoria's vanity that morning. The drawer was still locked. Victoria hadn't looked inside yet, didn't know the bottles were gone, but it was only a matter of time. The phone rang at 2:15 in the afternoon. Clarice grabbed it on the first ring. Whitmore residence? It's Eleanor. Are you alone? Yes, ma'am. The test came back. Eleanor's voice was tight with controlled anger. The honey is contaminated with arsenic trioxide, enough to kill a person over time. And Gerald's blood work shows acute arsenic poisoning consistent with long-term exposure. Clarice closed her eyes. She'd known it in her bones. But hearing the scientific proof made it real in a way that observation never could. Dr. Chen says another week of exposure and Gerald would have been beyond saving. His kidneys and liver are already damaged, but the doctors know what they're treating now. They started chelation therapy to remove the arsenic from his system. Will he survive? Probably. If we'd waited any longer... She didn't finish that sentence. This is attempted murder, Clarice. Premeditated. Calculated. Victoria Whitmore has been slowly killing my brother for months.
But can we prove she did it? That's the problem. Eleanor's frustration bled through the phone line. The honey is poisoned. Gerald's poisoned. But Victoria could claim she knew nothing about it, that someone else tampered with the honey, that it came from the store that way. Without her confession, a good defense attorney could create reasonable doubt. Clarice felt that familiar powerlessness creeping back in. Evidence wasn't enough. Scientific proof wasn't enough. Nothing was ever enough. Which is why we need that confession, Eleanor said. Are you still willing? Clarice thought about Gerald in that hospital bed, thought about Victoria's satisfied smile as her husband convulsed on the floor, thought about every time her truth had been dismissed because the color of her skin made her words worthless. Yes, ma'am, I'm willing. It has to be tomorrow. Victoria will check that vanity drawer eventually, and when she discovers the bottles are gone, she'll know someone's onto her. We need to move before she has time to run or cover her tracks. Tomorrow, Clarice repeated, her mouth going dry. I'm bringing a police contact who specializes in wire surveillance. We'll fit you tomorrow morning, go over exactly what you need to say, what questions to ask. Your job is to make Victoria feel safe enough to boast. Make her think you're powerless. That won't be hard, ma'am. She already thinks that. Use it. Her arrogance is her weakness. She thinks she's untouchable. Make her prove it. After hanging up, Clarice walked through the empty mansion. Her footsteps echoed on the marble floors. Every room held memories, 8 years of cleaning, observing, being invisible. Tomorrow, she would stop being invisible. Tomorrow, she would make Victoria Whitmore see her. If you're on the edge of your seat right now, if this story has you hooked, smash that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it, because what happens next will determine whether justice is possible or just a fantasy. The hospital called at 6 p.m. Victoria's voice was syrupy sweet. Clarice, dear, I'm staying at the hospital again tonight. Gerald's condition is still quite serious. A pause. I trust everything is in order at the house? Yes, ma'am. Nothing unusual. Nothing out of place. No, ma'am. Everything's exactly as you left it. Good. The sweetness evaporated. See that it stays that way.
Clarice hung up and released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Victoria still didn't know about the missing bottles. They had until tomorrow. Maybe. That night, Clarice couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, playing tomorrow's confrontation over and over in her mind. What if Victoria discovered the wire? What if she became violent? What if the whole plan fell apart and Clarice ended up arrested for theft? What if she died tomorrow and Marcus lost his mother? Clarice picked up the phone and dialed her son's number. He was staying with her sister while he worked a summer job before college. "Mama, everything okay?" Marcus's young voice filled with concern. "You never call this late." "Everything's fine, baby. I just wanted to hear your voice." "You're sure? You sound strange." "I'm sure, just tired." Clarice's throat tightened. "Marcus, I want you to know I'm proud of you. So proud. You're going to do amazing things." "Mama, you're scaring me. What's going on?" "Nothing, baby. I promise. I just needed to tell you that. Needed you to know." They talked for 10 more minutes about nothing important. His job, his plans for school, a girl he'd met at church. Normal things. Safe things. When Clarice hung up, tears were streaming down her face.
She pulled out her notebook filled with observations, page after page of evidence that had meant nothing until Eleanor believed her. She thought about all the black women who'd come before her, whose truth had been dismissed, whose voices had been silenced. Tomorrow, Clarice Monroe would speak, and someone would listen. Or she would lose everything trying. The morning came too fast. Clarice was up before dawn, dressed in her usual work clothes. She made coffee with hands that wouldn't stay steady. At 7 a.m. exactly, a knock on the kitchen door. Eleanor entered with a slight man carrying a briefcase. He had kind eyes and graying temples. "This is Detective James Porter," Eleanor said quietly. "He's one of the few honest cops in Charleston. He'll be handling the wire." "Ma'am?" Porter nodded at Clarice. Miss Whitmore explained the situation. "What you're doing is incredibly brave." "Or incredibly stupid," Clarice said. Porter smiled slightly. "Sometimes they're the same thing." He opened his briefcase. "Let's get you set up." The wire was smaller than Clarice expected. A thin microphone that would tape to her chest, connected to a recorder that would hide in her apron pocket. "It's voice-activated," Porter explained as he worked. "Starts recording the moment someone speaks. Battery lasts 4 hours." Eleanor stood by the window, watching the driveway. "Victoria called the hospital this morning. Gerald's stable. She's planning to come back to the house around noon to shower and change clothes." 3 hours. Porter finished taping the wire to Clarice's skin. It felt strange, invasive, like wearing a secret bomb. "You need to get her talking about the poisoning specifically. Get her to admit she put arsenic in the honey. Get her to say she intended to kill Gerald. The more details, the better." "How do I do that without making her suspicious?" "Confront her directly. Tell her you know what she's done. Let her think you're powerless to stop her. Appeal to her ego. She'll want to explain how clever she's been. And if she doesn't confess, if she just fires me or calls the police, then we have nothing," Eleanor admitted. "But Clarice, you're the only person who can do this. You're the one who saw the truth when everyone else was blind. You're the one who had the courage to act." Clarice touched the wire under her blouse. "Where will you be?" "Parked outside in an unmarked car, listening. If anything goes wrong, if you say the code word, Marcus, I come through that door with backup in 30 seconds. 30 seconds is a long time if she has a gun." "Does she own a gun?" Porter asked. "I don't know," Clarice realized. "I never thought to check." The three of them looked at each other. "Too late now," Eleanor said. "Victoria will be here soon." Porter and Eleanor left through the kitchen door, disappearing into an unmarked sedan down the street. Clarice was alone in the Whitmore mansion, waiting. The wire itched against her skin. Every sound made her jump. The clock ticked toward noon with agonizing slowness. At 11:45, Clarice heard a car in the driveway. Victoria was home. Clarice positions herself in the study, dusting the same bookshelf for the third time.
Her heart hammered so hard she thought the wire might pick it up. The door opened. Heels clicked on marble. Victoria appeared in the study doorway, looking exhausted. Her makeup was smudged, her perfect hair slightly disheveled. She seemed surprised to find Clarice there.
I thought you might have taken some time off, Victoria said, given the circumstances. This was it. The moment everything changed. Clarice set down her dustcloth and turned to face the woman who'd been murdering her husband. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, her voice steadier than she felt, I need to speak with you about something. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Can it wait? I'm exhausted. No, ma'am. They can't wait. What is it? Clarice took a breath. Let the words come. I know what you've been doing to Mr. Whitmore. The air in the room changed, became electric, dangerous. Victoria's exhaustion vanished. Her ice-blue eyes went cold and sharp as broken glass. I'm sure I don't know what you mean. Clarice's pulse roared in her ears, but she kept her voice level. The honey, Mrs. Whitmore. The special honey you keep locked in your vanity drawer. Victoria's face remained perfectly still, but something flickered behind her eyes. Calculation. Assessment. I keep many things in my vanity, she said carefully. I fail to see how that concerns you. It concerns me when you're using it to poison your husband. The words hung between them like a loaded gun. For 3 seconds, Victoria didn't move. Then she laughed, that same brittle, cold sound Clarice had heard on the phone weeks ago. You've lost your mind, Victoria. Moved further into the study, positioning herself between Clarice and the door. The stress of Gerald's illness has made you paranoid. I heard you on the phone, Clarice pressed, remembering Porter's instructions. Get details, get specifics. Talking about the life insurance, about being free to be with your lover once Mr. Whitmore was gone. Victoria's mask cracked slightly. You were eavesdropping on a private conversation? I was doing my job. You were plotting murder. That's a serious accusation. Victoria's voice went sharp as a knife. You have any proof? The arsenic bottle in your drawer, right next to the honey jar. Victoria went very still. You've been going through my personal belongings? That's grounds for immediate dismissal, probably even arrest. Is it also grounds for arrest to poison your husband? Clarice challenged. You're insane. But even if such a ridiculous thing were true, who would believe you? Maybe someone at the hospital. Maybe the police. Victoria stepped closer, her beautiful face twisting into something ugly. You think anyone would take your word over mine? A maid? A black maid accusing a respected white woman? The truth doesn't change based on who speaks it. The truth, Victoria laughed again, cruel and mocking. The truth is whatever people with power say it is.
The arsenic, Clarice prompted. Where did you get it? Hardware store. Bought it 2 years ago for pest control. Victoria made air quotes. Nobody questions a woman buying rat poison. Nobody pays attention to what we do. And you put it in the honey? Just a little bit every day. Victoria's voice took on an almost dreamy quality, like she was proud of her own cleverness. Mixed it in so carefully. Gerald never tasted a thing. Just thought the honey was bitter. The doctors were completely baffled. She smiled, remembering. He was beautiful, really. Watching him get weaker and weaker, while everyone fussed over him with useless tests. They never suspected. Why would they? I was the devoted wife, wearing myself thin with worry. You're proud of yourself, Clarice said, disgust thick in her voice. I'm proud that I was smart enough to plan it perfectly. Victoria moved to Gerald's desk, ran her fingers over the wood. Another month, and he would have been gone. The insurance money alone is worth $500,000, plus the house, the investments, the firm partnership. Raymond and I were going to move to Europe, start over somewhere beautiful. But I ruined that plan?
You? Victoria turned, her face filled with contempt. You think you've ruined anything? Even if you ran to...
Eleanor approached slowly. You did it. You actually did it. Is the recording clear? Will it be enough? It's perfect. Eleanor's voice was thick with emotion. She confessed to everything. The arsenic, the planning, the motive, all of it. Clarice's legs suddenly felt weak. She sat down hard in Gerald's desk chair. I can't believe that worked. You were incredible, Eleanor said. You kept her talking, got every detail we needed. The way you pushed her buttons made her feel superior. She did that herself, Clarice said. Her arrogance is what caught her. She really believed I was powerless, that my truth meant nothing. A lot of people believe that, Eleanor sat on the edge of the desk. That's what we're fighting against. Not just Victoria's crime, but the whole system that told her she could get away with it. Through the window, Clarice watched the police car drive away with Victoria in the back seat, her perfect face twisted with rage behind the glass. One of the officers stayed behind. He approached the study, looking uncomfortable. Miss Monroe, I need to take your statement, and we'll need that wire as evidence. Clarice nodded. Detective Porter entered, helped her carefully remove the recording device. You did good work today, Porter said quietly. Took real courage. Will she go to prison? With this recording? With the physical evidence of the poisoned honey? With Gerald's blood tests? Porter nodded. Yeah, she's going to prison for a long time. After Porter left with the wire, Eleanor and Clarice sat alone in the quiet mansion. She'd done it. Actually done it. Faced down a murderer and won. But Victoria's words still echoed in her head. You're nothing. Your truth means nothing. For her whole life, the world had told Clarice that was true. Today, she'd proven it was a lie. The phone rang, making her jump. Whitmore residence? Mama? Marcus's voice, confused and worried. Aunt Ruby just called. She said she saw police cars at the Whitmore house on the news. What's going on? Are you okay? I'm fine, baby. Everything's fine now. The news said Mrs. Whitmore was arrested for trying to kill Mr. Whitmore. Mama, what happened? I'll explain everything when I see you. But Marcus, I need you to know something. I need you to understand that your voice matters. Your truth matters, no matter what anyone tells you. I know that, Mama. You taught me that. Good. Don't ever forget it. Promise me. I promise. Mama, you're really okay? I'm really okay. After hanging up, Clarice finally let the tears come. Not tears of fear or sadness, but something else, something bigger. Relief, pride, the bone-deep satisfaction of standing up to evil and winning. Outside, the sun was setting over Charleston, the same sun that had risen on a world where Clarice Monroe was invisible, powerless, nothing. But that world had just cracked wide open, and through that crack, light was beginning to pour through. How do you prove you're human to people who have spent their whole lives treating you like furniture? 3 months after Victoria Whitmore's arrest, Clarice Monroe sat outside Courtroom B in the Charleston County Courthouse, waiting to testify in the trial that had become the biggest scandal South Carolina had seen in decades. The hallway buzzed with reporters, photographers, curious onlookers, white faces everywhere, staring at her like she was some kind of curiosity, the black maid who'd caught a white woman trying to commit murder. The story had made national news. Eleanor sat beside her, a steady presence in a tailored suit. You ready, ma'am? My hands are clasped tight in my lap to keep them from shaking. No, ma'am. Good. People who think they're ready usually aren't. Eleanor squeezed her shoulder. Remember, you're telling the truth. That's all you have to do. Just tell the truth. The courtroom doors opened. A bailiff called her name. Miss Clarice Monroe, to the stand. This was it. Clarice stood on legs that felt like water and walked into a courtroom packed with people. The jury box held 12 white men in suits, their faces unreadable. The judge, an older man with silver hair,
watched her approach the witness stand. And there, at the defense table, sat Victoria Whitmore. Victoria looked different than she had 3 months ago. Thinner, harder. Her ice blue eyes locked onto Clarice with pure hatred as Clarice passed. The bailiff held out a Bible. "Raise your right hand. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" "I do." Clarice sat in the witness chair. The entire courtroom stared at her. She'd never felt so exposed in her life. The prosecutor, a serious man named Robert Jameson, approached with a kind smile. "Miss Monroe, thank you for being here today. Can you tell the court how long you worked for the Whitmore family?" 8 years, sir." "And during those 8 years, how would you describe your relationship with the defendant, Mrs. Victoria Whitmore?" Clarice looked at Victoria, then back at the prosecutor. "Professional, sir. I was the maid. She was my employer." "Did Mrs. Whitmore treat you well?" Clarice paused. Honesty was required, but honesty was complicated. "She treated me the way most wealthy white folks treat their help, sir. Like I was there to serve and nothing more." A murmur went through the courtroom. The judge banged his gavel. For the next hour, Prosecutor Jameson walked Clarice through her testimony. The overheard phone conversation, the pattern of Gerald's symptoms, the discovery of the arsenic bottle, the rejection she faced when she tried to tell people what she'd seen. "Dr. Hutchinson told you that medical matters were beyond your understanding, is that correct?" "Yes, sir." "And Mr. Thomas Reed threatened you when you tried to tell him about the poisoning?" "Yes, sir. Said I could be arrested for defamation. Said I'd never work in Charleston again." "Why didn't you stop trying? Why not just keep quiet and protect yourself?" Clarice looked at the jury. 12 white men who held her credibility in their hands. "Because Mr. Whitmore was dying, sir. And I was the only person who knew why. Staying quiet meant letting a murder happen right in front of me. I couldn't do that." Jameson nodded. "Let's talk about the confrontation with Mrs. Whitmore, the one that was recorded. Can you tell the jury how that came about?" Clarice explained the wire, the plan, the terrifying moments before Victoria arrived home. "And during that confrontation, did Mrs. Whitmore confess to poisoning her husband?" "Yes, sir. She told me everything. How she bought the arsenic, how she mixed it in the honey, how she was waiting for Mr. Whitmore to die so she could collect the insurance money and be with her lover." "Why do you think she confessed so freely?" Clarice met Jameson's eyes. "Because she thought my word meant nothing, sir. She thought being a black maid made me powerless. She believed she could tell me everything and still get away with it." The prosecutor played the recording then. Victoria's voice filled the courtroom, dripping with contempt and arrogance. "You're nothing, Clarice. Your truth means nothing. I decided to speed up the inevitable, just a little arsenic every day. The doctors were completely baffled. My word against yours, Clarice. How do you think that plays out?" Several jurors shifted uncomfortably. One elderly man's face had gone pale. When the recording ended, the courtroom sat in heavy silence.
"No further questions," Jameson said. Then came the part Clarice had been dreading. Victoria's defense attorney stood. His name was Harrison Caldwell, from one of Charleston's most prestigious law firms. Expensive suit, slicked back hair, eyes like a shark. He smiled at Clarice, but there was nothing kind in it. "Miss Monroe, you testified that you overheard a phone conversation where Mrs. Whitmore allegedly discussed her husband's death. Is that correct?" "Yes, sir." "But you were eavesdropping, weren't you? Listening to a private conversation you had no right to hear." "I was in the next room doing my job, sir. I couldn't help but hear." "Couldn't help it."
Caldwell's voice sharpened. Or chose not to walk away, chose to stand there and listen to something that was none of your business. Eleanor shot to her feet. Objection! Argumentative! Sustained, the judge said. Mr. Caldwell, ask questions, don't make speeches. Caldwell smiled. Of course, Your Honor. He turned back to Clarice. Miss Monroe, you also testified that you entered Mrs. Whitmore's bedroom and went through her personal belongings, correct? Yes, sir. Without permission? Yes, sir. That's a violation of privacy, isn't it? Some might even call it trespassing. I was looking for evidence that Mr. Whitmore was being poisoned. Or perhaps you were snooping where you didn't belong. Caldwell paced in front of the jury. And then you stole items from Mrs. Whitmore's bedroom, the honey jar and the arsenic bottle. You took them without permission. That's theft, isn't it? Clarice's hands tightened in her lap. I took evidence of a crime, sir. You took property that didn't belong to you. That's the definition of theft, Miss Monroe. Caldwell's voice grew louder. In fact, you committed multiple crimes, didn't you? Trespassing, theft, invasion of privacy. Yet you sit here accusing my client of wrongdoing. Objection. Eleanor was on her feet again. Miss Monroe is not on trial here. Overruled, the judge said. The witness's actions are relevant to credibility. Continue, Mr. Caldwell. Caldwell moved closer to Clarice. Miss Monroe, how much education do you have? I finished 10th grade, sir. 10th grade. So, no medical training? No scientific background? No, sir. Yet you diagnosed Mr. Whitmore with arsenic poisoning based on what? Your extensive medical knowledge? Based on what I saw and heard, sir.
What you thought you saw and heard. Caldwell turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, we're expected to believe that this woman, with a 10th grade education, a grudge against her employer, and a history of theft, somehow knows better than trained physicians with medical degrees. That she, and she alone, discovered what multiple doctors missed. The doctors didn't know to test for arsenic, Clarice said quietly, because nobody told them to look for it. Or because it wasn't there until you put it there, Caldwell's voice rose. No further questions. Clarice left the witness stand, feeling like she'd been beaten. Her hands shook. Her legs barely carried her back to her seat beside Eleanor. You did fine, Eleanor whispered. He tried to rattle you, but you held strong. But Clarice had seen the jurors' faces. 12 white men who had to decide whether to believe a black maid or a white socialite. The trial continued for 3 more days. The prosecution presented the poisoned honey, tested and confirmed to contain lethal amounts of arsenic. They presented Gerald's blood work, showing acute poisoning. They presented phone records showing hundreds of calls between Victoria and Raymond Delacroix. They presented the life insurance policies Victoria had secretly taken out on Gerald. And they played that recording again and again. Victoria's voice cold and arrogant, confessing to attempted murder. The defense fought hard. They called character witnesses who testified that Victoria was devoted to Gerald. They brought in their own expert who suggested the arsenic could have been introduced by anyone. They painted Clarice as a disgruntled employee with an axe to grind. But they couldn't explain away Victoria's own words on that recording. On the 4th day, both sides rested. The jury went to deliberate. Clarice sat in the hallway with Eleanor, waiting. 3 hours passed. 4. 5. What's taking so long? Clarice asked. Either they're being thorough or someone's holding out. Eleanor's face was tense. With an all-white jury in South Carolina, hearing a black woman accuse a white woman, it could go either way. At hour 6, the bailiff emerged. Juries reached a verdict. The courtroom packed again. Clarice's heart hammered as the jury filed back in. She tried to read their faces but couldn't. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked.
The foreman, a thin man with gray hair, stood. "We have, Your Honor, in the case of the state of South Carolina versus Victoria Whitmore, on the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, how do you find?" The courtroom held its breath. "We find the defendant guilty." The word hit like thunder. Victoria's scream cut through the courtroom. "No! This is wrong! That woman is lying! She's a liar!" The judge banged his gavel. "Order! Mrs. Whitmore, control yourself or you'll be removed." But Victoria was beyond control. She lunged toward Clarice, rage twisting her beautiful face. "You did this! You ruined everything! You're nothing! Nothing!" Bailiffs grabbed her, pulled her back. Victoria fought them, screaming obscenities, her perfect facade completely shattered. They dragged her from the courtroom, her screams echoing down the hall. Clarice sat frozen, tears streaming down her face. "It's over," Eleanor said, pulling her into a hug. "You did it. Justice won." But around them, Clarice heard the whispers. "Can you believe they convicted her on a maid's testimony? That woman had some nerve accusing Mrs. Whitmore." "Things are changing too fast. Used to be people knew their place." Justice had won, but the battle was far from over. Gerald Whitmore came home from the hospital on a Tuesday in late November. Clarice watched from the kitchen window as Eleanor helped him out of the car. He'd lost 40 pounds. His once strong frame looked fragile, breakable. The arsenic had done permanent damage to his kidneys and liver. The doctors said he'd live, but he'd never be quite the same. Still, he was alive. That was more than Victoria had planned. Clarice had spent the last week preparing the house for his return. Fresh linens, stocked refrigerator, flowers in every room. She wasn't sure if she still worked here. Nobody had discussed her employment status since the trial. But the house needed tending, and she needed something to do with her hands. The front door opened. Eleanor's voice echoed through the hall. "Easy now, one step at a time." Clarice stayed in the kitchen, unsure if Gerald would want to see her. She was the woman who had saved his life, yes, but she was also a constant reminder of his wife's betrayal. Some men couldn't handle that kind of truth.
"Clarice," Eleanor called. "Are you here?" "Yes, ma'am, in the kitchen." "Gerald wants to see you." Clarice's stomach twisted. She smoothed her apron, walked to the front hall. Gerald stood there, leaning heavily on a cane. His face was gaunt. His hair had gone almost completely gray. But his eyes were clear and focused directly on her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Gerald's face crumbled. Tears spilled down his cheeks. "You saved my life," he said, his voice breaking. "Even when it would have been safer to stay silent. Even when no one would listen. You saved my life." Clarice felt her own tears rising. "Mr. Whitmore, Come here," he said. She approached slowly. Gerald reached out with a trembling hand and took hers. "I can never repay this debt. Never. You risked everything, your job, your freedom, your life, to save someone who's been part of a system that's oppressed you since the day you were born. You were always kind to me, sir. You helped my son." "No." Gerald's grip tightened. "I wasn't kind. Basic human decency isn't kindness, Clarice. Saying please and thank you doesn't make me a good man. I was complicit. In everything." Eleanor helped him to a chair in the study. Clarice followed, uncertain. Gerald sat heavily, the cane resting against his knee. "When you tried to tell Dr. Hutchinson what was happening, he dismissed you. When you tried to tell Thomas Reed, he threatened you. Do you know why? Because I'm black, sir. Because I'm a maid. Because my word doesn't carry weight. Because we created a world where that's true.
Every time I accepted service without seeing the person providing it. Every time I let casual racism slide in conversation because it was easier than confronting it. Every time I benefited from a system designed to elevate people who look like me and diminish people who look like you. I built the world that nearly killed me. The words hung heavy in the air. Dr. Hutchinson is a good man by most measures. So is Thomas Reed. They're not evil, but they were so conditioned to dismiss voices like yours that they literally couldn't hear you trying to save my life. And that's on me, on all of us who let that conditioning happen. Clarice didn't know what to say. She'd never heard a white man, especially not a wealthy, powerful white man, talk like this. Eleanor spoke from the doorway. The trial exposed something ugly in Charleston society. People are being forced to confront the fact that they almost let a man die because they refused to believe a black woman. Almost? Gerald laughed bitterly. I would have died. Victoria had it planned perfectly. She knew the system would protect her, knew that even if you spoke up, you'd be dismissed. She weaponized racism to commit murder. He looked at Clarice with red-rimmed eyes. I failed you long before Victoria tried to kill me. I failed you by being part of a system that made you invisible, that made your truth worthless because of your skin color. Gerald pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket with shaking hands. This is a transfer of deed. The property on Jasper Street, the small house I own there. It's yours now, free and clear. You won't have to work in another person's house unless you choose to. Clarice stared at the envelope like it might explode. Mr. Whitmore, I can't. You can. You will. He held it out. It's not payment. There's no payment large enough. It's acknowledgement. You deserve security, stability, a home of your own. With trembling fingers, Clarice took the envelope. Inside was a legal document transferring ownership of a house to her name. A house. Her own house. There's more, Eleanor added. Gerald and I are establishing a fund, the Domestic Workers Advocacy Fund, for women, mostly black women, who face exploitation or danger in their employment but have no legal recourse. We want you to help administer it, Gerald said. A paid position. A real salary, not maid's wages. You'll help other women whose voices aren't being heard. Women in situations like the one you faced. Clarice's vision blurred with tears. Why? Because you showed us that justice requires more than laws. It requires believing people, listening to voices we've been conditioned to ignore. One verdict can't fix the system, but it can crack it open. Let light in. Gerald stood slowly, using the cane for support. The newspapers are calling you a hero. Churches want you to speak. But I know the truth is more complicated. You shouldn't have had to be heroic. Reporting a crime, telling the truth, seeking justice, these should have been simple. But this world made them nearly impossible for you.
Some folks still think I overstepped, Clarice said quietly. I hear the whispers. Getting too bold. Forgetting her place. Your place is wherever you choose to stand, Gerald replied, and anyone who says otherwise can answer to me. Over the next weeks, Charleston society wrestled with what the trial had revealed. Dr. Hutchinson published a public apology in the newspaper, admitting he'd dismissed Clarice's concerns due to unconscious bias. He pledged to listen more carefully to all patients and staff, regardless of race or position. Thomas Reed was less apologetic. He left Charleston altogether, unable to face the public criticism of his threats against Clarice. 3 other domestic workers came forward with their own stories. One had been sexually harassed by her employer and told to keep quiet. Another had witnessed tax fraud, but been threatened into silence. A third had been physically abused and had nowhere to turn. The Domestic Workers Advocacy Fund took on all 3 cases. Victoria Whitmore was sentenced to life in prison without possibility of parole.
At sentencing, she showed no remorse, blamed Clarice for ruining her life, blamed Gerald for being a burden, blamed everyone but herself. The judge had been unmoved. Mrs. Whitmore, you committed one of the most calculated, cold-blooded crimes this court has ever seen. You will spend the rest of your life behind bars. As officers led her away, Victoria had looked back at Clarice one final time. You think you've won, she said, but you're still nothing. You'll always be nothing. But sitting in the courtroom, surrounded by Eleanor, Gerald, Detective Porter, and Dr. Chen, all people who believed her, fought for her, stood with her, Clarice had never felt less like nothing in her entire life. Now, in early December, Clarice stood in the doorway of her new house on Jasper Street. It was small, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, a living room with wooden floors that creaked. It needed paint. The porch steps wobbled slightly. It was perfect. Marcus stood beside her, tears in his eyes. Mama, you own a house. You actually own a house. We own a house, baby. This is ours. Nobody can take it away. That night, Clarice lay in her own bed, in her own house, staring at the ceiling. She thought about Victoria's final words. You're nothing. For 42 years, the world had told Clarice that was true. She was a maid, a black woman in the South, invisible, powerless, worthless. But she'd spoken truth when it was dangerous to speak. She'd gathered evidence when gathering evidence could get her killed. She stood up to evil when everyone said her standing meant nothing. And she'd won. Not because she was extraordinary, though Eleanor insisted she was, but because she refused to let a broken system dictate her conscience. She saw wrong and acted, even when action seemed futile. The phone rang. Clarice answered. Miss Monroe, this is Beverly Jenkins. You don't know me, but I'm a maid for the Cunningham family on King Street. The woman's voice shook. I heard about what you did, about the fund you're starting. I think my employer's stealing my wages, and I don't know what to do. Everyone I've asked for help says I must be mistaken, that the Cunninghams are good people, but I know what I've seen. Clarice sat up, reaching for a pen and paper. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. I'm listening. And as Beverly's story poured out, Clarice understood with perfect clarity why Gerald and Eleanor had created the fund, why they'd asked her to run it. Because there were thousands of Beverly Jenkins out there, thousands of women whose truths were dismissed, whose voices meant nothing to people in power. One victory hadn't fixed the system, but it had proven the system could be challenged. And Clarice Monroe, who'd spent her life being told she was nothing, was going to spend the rest of it proving that every voice mattered. Every single one. What happens when you win, but half the world wishes you'd stayed silent? Clarice Monroe discovered the answer on a cold January morning in 1964, 3 weeks after Victoria Whitmore's sentencing. She was walking to the Domestic Workers Advocacy Fund office, a small space Eleanor had rented on Meeting Street, when a woman stepped into her path.
White, middle-aged, expensive coat and pearls, face twisted with contempt. You should be ashamed of yourself, the woman hissed. Clarice stopped. Excuse me? You heard me. Destroying a respectable woman's life. Getting above yourself. You people are getting too bold, thinking you can accuse your betters of anything you please. Other pedestrians slowed, watching. Some faces showed sympathy. Others showed agreement with the angry woman. Mrs. Whitmore tried to murder her husband, Clarice said evenly. That's not an accusation. That's a fact proven in court. Because you planted evidence, because you manipulated everyone. The woman's voice rose. Women like you are ruining the South, forgetting your place, making up lies to bring down good families. Good families don't commit murder. "You're a disgrace." The woman spat at Clarice's feet and walked away. Clarice stood frozen on the sidewalk, her hands shaking. She'd known this was coming, had prepared herself for it, but preparation didn't make the hatred hurt less. An elderly black man who'd witnessed the encounter approached carefully. "Don't let them get to you, sister. You did right. We all know you did right." But as Clarice continued to the office, she wondered, did everyone know she'd done right? Or was the world divided between those who believed justice had been served and those who wished she'd kept her mouth shut? The office was small but functional. One room with 2 desks, filing cabinets, a telephone. Eleanor had insisted Clarice take the desk by the window. "You're the face of this organization," Eleanor had said. "Women need to see someone who looks like them, someone who's lived what they're living." That morning, Clarice found 17 letters waiting on her desk. She opened them one by one. 12 were from domestic workers sharing their own stories. Wage theft, sexual harassment, physical abuse, threats. Each letter ended the same way. "Please help. Nobody will listen to me." But 5 letters were different. "You're a troublemaker who should be run out of Charleston." "That white woman is in prison because of your lies. God will judge you." "Uppity women like you need to learn respect. Watch your back." The last one was just 2 words. "You're next." Clarice's hands trembled as she set the threatening letters aside. She'd saved a man's life, caught a murderer, helped create something that could protect other women. And half the city wanted her punished for it. Eleanor arrived at 9 carrying coffee and newspapers. She took one look at Clarice's face and knew. "More hate mail?" "5 today." She showed her the letters. Eleanor's jaw tightened. "We're taking these to the police. These are threats. The police won't care about threats against a black woman who made white folk uncomfortable. Detective Porter will care." And Porter did care. He came to the office that afternoon, documented everything, promised to investigate. But they all knew the truth. Anonymous hate mail rarely led to arrests. "Be careful," Porter warned. "Don't walk alone after dark. Vary your routine. Some people are genuinely angry about that verdict." If you're watching this and thinking about the price of speaking truth, hit that like button. Share this story, because what Clarice faced after her victory is something we need to understand. Justice isn't just about winning. It's about surviving what comes after. The speaking invitations started arriving too. Churches wanted Clarice to share her testimony. Civil rights organizations wanted her at their events. Northern newspapers wanted interviews. Everyone wanted a piece of the black maid who'd taken down a wealthy white murderer. Some invitations came with genuine respect. Others felt exploitative, like she was being paraded around as proof that the system worked. "You don't have to accept any of them," Eleanor advised. "You don't owe anyone your story." But Clarice thought about Beverly Jenkins, the first woman who'd called the fund, about the 12 letters from women desperate for help, about all the voices still being ignored. "If I speak, maybe someone else finds the courage to speak too. Maybe that's worth the discomfort." She accepted 3 speaking engagements: a black church in Charleston, a women's group in Atlanta, a civil rights meeting in Birmingham. The black church welcomed her like a hero, standing ovation before she'd said a word. Tears and amens throughout her testimony. Afterwards, women lined up to hug her, thank her, tell her she'd given them hope. But the other 2 events brought protesters. In Atlanta, white women held signs, "Stop the lies," and "Respect your betters." They shouted as Clarice entered the building, called her slurs she wouldn't repeat. One threw a rock that shattered a window. In Birmingham, the threats were worse. Anonymous phone calls to the venue, bomb threats that turned out to be false but succeeded in terrifying everyone present. Clarice gave her speech anyway, told the truth anyway, but the fear followed her home. Gerald recovered slowly. The doctor said he'd never regain full health. The arsenic had destroyed too much tissue, damaged too many organs, but he was alive and determined to use whatever time he had left to make amends.
He restructured his law firm's hiring practices to include more black attorneys. He donated heavily to civil rights organizations. He spoke publicly about his own complicity in creating systems that had nearly killed him. Not everyone appreciated his transformation. 3 senior partners quit the firm, disgusted by Gerald's radical changes. Several wealthy clients took their business elsewhere. The Whitmore family name, once synonymous with Southern respectability, became controversial. Gerald's own brother stopped speaking to him. "You've let that maid fill your head with nonsense," his brother said during their final conversation. "You're destroying everything Father built." Father built it on the backs of people he considered less than human. I'd rather destroy that than preserve it. But the rejection hurt. Clary saw it in Gerald's eyes when he thought no one was watching. "Are you sorry?" she asked him one afternoon at the fund office. "For standing up? For changing things?" Gerald looked at her with surprise. "Sorry? Clarice, you saved my life, not just from Victoria's poison, but from my own blindness. I was dying long before the arsenic, dying morally, spiritually, complicitly accepting evil because it was comfortable. You woke me up. It cost you friends, family. It cost me people who valued comfort over justice. That's not much of a loss." He smiled sadly. "Besides, I gained something better. A purpose, a reason to use whatever years I have left doing something that matters." The Domestic Workers Advocacy Fund helped its first client win a wage theft case in February. The employer was ordered to pay back wages plus damages. It was a small victory, but it proved the fund could make a difference. The second client's case was harder. She'd been sexually assaulted by her employer. The police had refused to investigate, saying it was her word against his. Eleanor took the case to federal court, arguing civil rights violations. The trial was brutal. The woman's character was attacked, her past relationships examined, her credibility questioned at every turn. But Eleanor was relentless, and the jury, this time including 2 black members, found for the plaintiff. Another victory, another crack in the foundation. But with each victory came more backlash. The fund's office was vandalized twice. Windows broken, hateful messages spray painted on the walls. Someone slashed the tires on Eleanor's car. Anonymous calls threatened violence if they didn't shut down. Clarice and Eleanor hired security, changed locks, installed better lighting, kept fighting. This is what change looks like: ugly, violent, desperate. The system doesn't fall quietly. It fights back. "I know," Clarice replied. "I just wish it didn't fight so hard." At night, alone in her house on Jasper Street, Clarice sometimes wondered if it had been worth it. She'd saved Gerald's life, yes. Started something meaningful, yes. But she'd also made herself a target, made her son worry every time she left the house, made enemies who genuinely wanted her dead. Was justice worth that price? Then she'd read the letters from women the fund had helped. Women who'd escaped abuse. Women who'd won their wages back. Women who'd found their voices because Clarice had found hers first. And she'd know the answer. Yes, it was worth it. Every threatening letter, every slur, every broken window. Because silence in the face of evil was its own kind of death. Clarice Monroe had chosen to live loudly in a world that demanded her silence. And she wasn't going to stop now. Marcus called from college one evening in March, his voice tight with worry. "Mama, I heard some boys at school talking. They said their fathers are in Charleston, said they're part of some group planning to deal with troublemakers. Mama, I think they were talking about you." Clarice's blood went cold. "What kind of group?"
I don't know. They shut up when they saw me listening. But Mama, please be careful. Please. After hanging up, Clarice sat in the darkness of her living room, listening to every creak and groan of the house. She'd won in court, but the real battle was just beginning. And somewhere out there, in the shadows of Charleston's streets, people were planning something that would test whether one black woman's voice could survive in a world determined to silence it. 5 years can change everything. or nothing at all, depending on who you are. Clarice Monroe stood at the window of the Domestic Workers Advocacy Fund office in 1968, watching Charleston move through another humid summer day. The office had expanded to 3 rooms now, 4 employees instead of just her and Eleanor. Filing cabinets stuffed with case files, success stories, and yes, still some hate mail. But less hate mail than before. That was progress, she supposed. Outside, the city looked the same as it had in 1963. Same white columns, same old money, same sweet southern charm hiding generations of ugliness underneath. But something fundamental had shifted. The Civil Rights Act had passed in 1964. Voting Rights Act in 1965. The world was changing, slowly and painfully, like a bone being set after breaking wrong. Clarice was 47 now. Silver threads ran through her dark hair. Reading glasses perched on her nose as she reviewed case files. She'd traded her maid's uniform for professional dresses, although she still felt strange wearing them sometimes. The phone rang. Clarice answered without looking up from her paperwork. Domestic Workers Advocacy Fund. This is Clarice Monroe. Miss Monroe, my name is Ruth Patterson. I work for a family in Savannah. My friend told me you helped her last year when her employer was withholding wages. I need help too. They're saying I stole jewelry, but I didn't. I think they're trying to fire me without paying what they owe, but nobody believes me because you're black and they're white. I understand. Tell me everything from the beginning. Take your time. This was her life now, listening to stories nobody else wanted to hear, believing women nobody else believed, using the legal system that had tried to silence her to amplify voices just like hers. The fund had helped 63 women in 5 years, recovered over $40,000 in stolen wages, won 3 harassment cases, gotten 2 abusive employers criminally charged. 63 victories, 63 cracks in the foundation. After finishing with Ruth Patterson and promising to take her case, Clarice walked to the small kitchen area where Eleanor was making coffee. Eleanor looked different too. More gray hair, deeper lines around her eyes. But the fire was still there, burning as bright as ever. Another wage theft case? Eleanor asked. Savannah this time, employer claiming the worker stole jewelry to avoid paying her. Classic. Eleanor poured 2 cups of coffee. We've seen that scheme at least a dozen times. They're not even creative anymore. They sat in companionable silence, sipping coffee. 5 years of working together had created a friendship Clarice never expected. A white civil rights attorney and a black former maid bound by a shared commitment to justice. Gerald called this morning. He wants to increase the fund's endowment, another $50,000. Clarice shook her head in wonder. That man's given so much already. He knows he can never give enough, but he tries. Eleanor smiled sadly. His health's declining again. The arsenic does permanent damage. Doctors say he's got maybe 5 more years if he's lucky. The reminder was sobering. Gerald had survived Victoria's murder attempt, but the poison had taken years off his life anyway. He'd used those years well, though. Transformed his law firm into one of the first in South Carolina to actively recruit black attorneys. Funded scholarships for black students, spoke at civil rights rallies despite death threats.
Some days, Clarice wondered if saving Gerald's life had saved more than just one man. Maybe it had saved dozens, hundreds, through the ripple effects of his transformation. Or maybe she was giving herself too much credit. Maybe Gerald would have changed anyway. But Eleanor always corrected that thinking. You didn't just save his life, Clarice. You showed him what courage looks like, what speaking truth to power costs. He couldn't stay blind after that. The mail arrived at noon. Clarice sorted through it. Case files, donation checks, administrative paperwork. And one letter that made her hand still. The return address was Leith Correctional Institution,
South Carolina's women's prison. The handwriting was elegant, familiar. Victoria Whitmore. Clarice stared at the envelope for a long moment before opening it. The letter inside was brief. Clarice, 5 years in prison gives a person time to think, time to face truths I spent my whole life running from. I hated you. God, how I hated you. You destroyed my life, took everything I planned, put me in this cage. For years, I blamed you for my suffering. But somewhere around year 3, I started listening to the other women here, started hearing their stories. Do you know how many of us are in prison because men in power put us here? Because we had no options, no voices, no way out of impossible situations? I'm not one of those women. I had every advantage, every privilege. I chose to commit murder because I was selfish, greedy, and cruel. I chose to use the system's racism as a weapon, knowing your word would mean nothing against mine. I was wrong. This isn't an apology. I can't apologize for attempted murder. Words don't carry that weight. But I want you to know that you were right to speak, right to fight, right to refuse silence even when silence would have been safer. You saved Gerald's life. You also saved something else, the possibility that truth can matter more than power, that justice can exist even when the deck is stacked against it. I'll die in here. That's appropriate. But you're out there changing the world, one case at a time, one woman's voice at a time. I hope that brings you some peace. Victoria. Clarice read the letter 3 times, emotions churning. She didn't forgive Victoria, couldn't forgive someone who'd coldly planned murder and only felt remorse after facing consequences. But there was something in the letter that felt genuine. A recognition of truth that Victoria had spent years denying. You okay? Eleanor asked, noticing Clarice's expression. Clarice handed her the letter. Eleanor read it, eyebrows rising.
Well, Eleanor said finally, people can change, even in prison. Even Victoria Whitmore, apparently. You think she means it? Doesn't matter. She's in prison for life. Whether she's remorseful or not doesn't change her sentence. Eleanor handed the letter back. But maybe it changes her. Maybe that's worth something. That evening, Clarice took the train to Washington, D.C. Marcus was graduating from Howard University with a law degree. Her son, her beautiful, brilliant son, was going to be an attorney. The graduation ceremony was held outdoors on a perfect May afternoon. Hundreds of black students in caps and gowns, representing hope and possibility, and futures that previous generations had been denied. When Marcus's name was called, Clarice stood and cheered so loudly that people 3 rows away turned to stare. She didn't care. Her son was graduating from college, getting a law degree, preparing to fight for justice just like Eleanor. After the ceremony, Marcus found her in the crowd. At 23, he was tall and handsome, with his father's build and Clarice's sharp eyes. "Mama!" He hugged her tight. "I did it. You did it, baby. I'm so proud. I couldn't have done it without you. Everything you did, saving Mr. Whitmore, starting the fund, standing up when everyone said to sit down. You showed me what courage looks like." Clarice's eyes filled with tears. "You're going to do amazing things, Marcus. I'm going to do what you taught me. Use my voice, fight for people whose voices get ignored. Make sure the system hears everyone, not just the powerful." He'd already accepted a position with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. Would start in the fall, defending civil rights workers, challenging discriminatory laws, continuing the fight his mother had joined. The ripple effects of one woman refusing to stay silent. On the train ride back to Charleston, Clarice thought about everything that had changed in 5 years. The fund had grown. The laws had changed.
More black voices were being heard in courtrooms and boardrooms and ballot boxes, but so much stayed the same. Hate mail still arrived, though less frequently. Women still called desperate for help, their truths still dismissed by people in power. The fight continued, harder some days than others. Clarice pulled out her old notebook, the one she'd kept hidden in her apron 5 years ago, documenting Victoria's crimes when nobody would listen. She flipped through pages of observations, dates, evidence that meant nothing until someone believed her. On the last page, she wrote, June 1968. Marcus graduated today. My son is a lawyer. He's going to fight for justice. I think about that terrible summer of 1963 sometimes, about the decision to speak when speaking seemed pointless, about all the times I was told my truth didn't matter. But it did matter. One voice can crack open a door for others. One refusal to stay silent can create space for more voices to rise. 63 women helped in 5 years. 63 lives changed. How many more will they help? How many more doors will open? Victoria's in prison. Gerald's using his privilege for good. Eleanor and I built something that will outlast us both. Marcus will carry this fight forward. Was it worth it? Worth the threats, the hate, the fear? Every single day. Clarice closed the notebook and looked out the train window at the South Carolina landscape rushing past. She'd chosen to live loudly in a world that demanded her silence. And now, 5 years later, that choice was echoing through dozens of lives, hundreds of lives, rippling outwards in ways she'd never fully see. The newspapers had called her a hero. Churches had praised her courage. But Clarice knew the uncomfortable truth. She'd done something that shouldn't have been heroic.
Reporting a crime, telling the truth, seeking justice, these should have been simple. But her skin color had made them nearly impossible. The real lesson wasn't that she was extraordinary. The real lesson was that the system was broken. And though one verdict couldn't fix that system, couldn't undo centuries of oppression and dismissal and invisibility, it was a crack in the foundation. A moment when one black woman's voice was heard and believed, even when every structure of society said it shouldn't matter. Clarice Monroe was 47 years old. She had gray hair and reading glasses and a small house on Jasper Street. She also had a son who was going to change the world, a fund that helped women find their voices, a legacy of speaking truth when silence would have been easier. Victoria Whitmore had been wrong about one thing. Clarice Monroe wasn't nothing. She was everything that terrified people who relied on silence to maintain power. And she was just getting started. The question Victoria's story left the world with was simple but profound. Will we listen? Will we hear the voices we've been conditioned to ignore? Will we believe the truths that make us uncomfortable? Will we see the people our systems have taught us are invisible? Clarice Monroe answered that question every single day. With every case she took, every woman she believed, every time she refused to let a broken system dictate who deserved justice. The answer was yes. We will listen. We must listen. Because the alternative, silence in the face of evil, was its own kind of death. And Clarice Monroe had chosen life. Loud, defiant, unsilenced life. The train pulled into Charleston Station as the sun set over the city. Clarice gathered her belongings and stepped onto the platform. Tomorrow, there would be more calls from women who needed help, more cases to investigate, more fights to win. But tonight, she would sit in her own house, in her own chair, and remember a summer 5 years ago when she'd made a choice that changed everything. Don't drink it. 2 words that had saved a life and cracked open a world. Clarice smiled to herself as she walked home through the Charleston evening. 2 words. Sometimes, that's all it takes to start a revolution. Historical note. While this narrative is fictionalized,
It draws inspiration from numerous real cases where domestic workers, predominantly black women in the Jim Crow South and beyond, uncovered crimes but were systematically disbelieved due to racial prejudice. The use of arsenic as an undetectable poison was common in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and many victims died because the only people who noticed the pattern of symptoms were servants, whose testimony was dismissed. This story honors those whose voices were silenced and celebrates the moments when justice, however imperfectly, prevailed. Clarice Monroe represents the countless women who spoke truth to power when the world told them they were nothing. Their legacy continues in every voice that refuses to stay silent.